Hello. I thought it was about time I got round to doing another short story. I've been a little tardy over the summer months, too many other projects on and so forth. Anyway, I finally got round to doing it. It's one of those stories which is more about the journey than the destination. It's a wistful story, perhaps born of recent circumstances in my life, or perhaps the lateness of the summer, the passing of time, something of that kind. Anyway, I hope you'll enjoy it.
"What have we today, Miss Roberts?" asked old Mr. Hedges. He sat heavily behind his comfortable old familiar chair. For half a century he'd sat here. His question was the opening to his day each day, unvarying. It broke the silence of the day, as keen as punching a factory clock. Miss Roberts, long of practice, she'd worked for him for 20 years now, was in perfect sync with her old boss, even as his old bones settled to their accustomed position in his chair behind the great desk. A cup of coffee was placed on a careful coaster before him. Miss Roberts always made the perfect cup of coffee in the morning. It was Mr. Hedges' solitary vice. A coffee at 8:30 sharp, thereafter tea for the rest of the day at timed intervals. Of course, tea. Hedges tea. The tea that sets you right in the morning, as their slogan proclaimed. Meetings were planned by Miss Roberts with deft precision around these breaks for tea. He depended upon them like an old, trusted pocket-watch. Miss Roberts, Effie to everyone in the firm except Mr. Hedges, placed a file of papers before him as he raised the delicate china tea-cup to his lips cautiously. He had no need of caution, though, because Miss Roberts had its temperature judged to perfection, unvarying from that of other days, 55 degrees Celsius exactly. She didn't test this with a thermometer. She knew it intuitively. "You're a wonder, Miss Roberts," he said routinely, but none the less appreciatively. She smiled, brisk about her business, satisfied that she had set the day off right for him, and it would now follow its ordained course like the planet in the sky would obey the movement of his watch. Any variance would be shepherded back into line with gentle firmness by the estimable Miss Roberts, like a lone straying sheep erring upon its way. "Do you know we started out importing coffee from the West Indies?" he remarked, peering over his glasses at the papers before him, leafing through them with mild interest. She gave him a quizzical smile of interrogation. Actually, she knew it. "We only turned to importing tea in the 1840s. That was my great-great-grandfather's idea. People were drinking green tea in England until then. But he began bringing in black tea, and people began adding milk and sugar. It caught on tremendously. And then when Queen Victoria began drinking Hedges tea, well, Hedges tea really took off." "You make it sound so exciting, Mr. Hedges," she commented warmly. "Well, I suppose it was, in a way. Without tea there would hardly have been a British Empire. For better or worse," he mused. "Why is that?" she queried. "Well, you see, tea had come from China. It wasn't really the thing in India at that time, but the East India Company started laying out great plantations, and soon India became the jewel in the crown, so to speak. We couldn't do without it. Britain couldn't do without it. Needed to protect the tea, you see." He laughed. She joined him, a measure of indulgence. He was loquacious this morning, had been more so than usual of late. She was perfectly tuned in to her boss's moods. "We used to ship the black tea back here in compressed balls, you know. It was efficient, on the great tea clippers before the coming of steam and the Suez Canal. That changed everything. Hedges tea always prided itself on getting the tea first to the London market. Speed was everything with the new harvest in those days." "Yes," she nodded. He was dwelling on the past because he was preoccupied with the difficult task of settling the future of the firm. The past was settled, it was all in order, but the future? Well, who knows? She understood this. At the propitious moment, perfectly cued, she said, "I've put back the meeting with Clark and Wright to 11:30. She began to arrange some papers at one corner of his desk, secured them by a bull clip. You will recall you wanted to talk to your grandsons, James and Thomas, about future plans." "Oh? Oh, yes. Yeah, very good," he said heavily. I shall have to think on that. A conundrum. A conundrum." Miss Roberts now stood, tall and clean white-bloused, black skirt and a hint of grey about her dark hair, glasses like angels' wings resolute upon her nose. She hesitated long enough to give Mr. Hedges time to raise anything he might wish to say, as she always did, in anticipation of her departing to her outer office. He was looking straight ahead, clearly thinking of something. She waited a little longer. At last he exhaled, long and with finality. "I'm retiring at the end of the summer," he said. "Yes," she said, smiled warmly at the old man, gentled by years. She knew it. 72, you see," he said, glancing up at her ruefully. "Can't go on forever." She didn't correct him. He appreciated that, looked around the room and then down at the arm of his chair, patted it with his right hand affectionately. "My father sat in this chair before me," he said, fond with memory. She nodded, a courteous smile, sedate in acknowledgment of this fact. "My grandfather bought the chair, I believe. I don't recall when that would be. I think it may have been after the First World War, perhaps the 1920s. It could have been the early 30s. Anyway, between the wars. I remember clambering over it when I was about 5? No, 6. I would have been 6. I was at school then. My father brought me into the office during the holidays. It was a sort of treat. I sat over in that corner. There used to be an old Victorian leather chair, a Chesterfield, I think, oxblood. It completely swallowed me up." He chuckled. Miss Roberts smiled, back in the moment with him. The years vanished in the room. This man of advancing years, with sparse white hair and sagging skin, eyebrows fierce, black still in defiance of age, atop his gold-rimmed glasses, was worthy of indulgence for her. She could nevertheless see him sitting there, a spot of colour in each cheek, his eyes round with astonishment at the world, at the place his father ruled, lordly in his domain. "My father was a strict man," he said. "Frederick, sit still," he'd say. I did, you know, very still. I sat in the chair, not daring to move. Mr. Hedges motioned at the space which the oxblood chair and his former self had once occupied now in some way. "He always called me Frederick when he was admonishing me," smiled Mr. Hedges. "I was Freddy when I was in his good books, when he took me fishing or something. 'Don't speak, Freddy,' he'd whisper. 'We don't want to scare the fish away.' And he'd puff on his pipe in silence, and the smoke would drift over the river. I can recall the sounds of the birds in the trees still." "Yes," said Miss Roberts. She knew Mr. Hedges was called Frederick, of course, but she didn't think of him as anything other than Mr. Hedges. And Freddy, well, the affectionate diminutive of his name made the elderly man seem almost frail, more vulnerable than she was used to seeing him. She glanced at the corner of the room again, following Mr. Hedges' indication of the place where Freddy had once sat, quiet, obedient, while strangers, big and threatening him with smiles and indulgence, came and went from the office. Sometimes they gave him a winning smile, which he shrank back from, into the safety of the oxblood Chesterfield, and the smoke from his father's pipe filled the room. "This was all long before your time, Miss Roberts," he said. "Yes," she smiled still. "Of course. There was a lady called Miss Winscott in those days. Nice lady. A little severe, I thought her then. She wasn't really, you know. She used to offer me a glass of lemonade, and I'd eagerly accept. But it turned out to be some sort of tart lemon drink. which had bits in it. I was so disappointed. It wasn't at all what I considered to be lemonade, but I had to drink it. Miss Roberts laughed. She was still there when I took over. That was after Father's unexpected passing. He was only 43, you know. He grew serious for a moment. That was so young, she said. Yes, it was a hard apprenticeship for me, taking over the firm. I wasn't prepared for it at all. I was, 23, 24? I wasn't married then. I met Margaret soon after I started there. His eyes took on a glazed look, encompassed distant lands, as he thought of his long-dead wife. Oh, inquired Miss Roberts, interested. Did you meet her here? Oh, no. It was at Wimbledon, a year or two after that. We had tickets through the firm, I think. It was a lot easier in those days. It was June, and the weather was glorious. Fabulous summer. But then I suppose all the summers seemed fabulous back then, even the rainy ones. He paused self-deprecatingly. A friend and I, Joe Courtney, we sat on the grass there and were just enjoying the sun between matches we were interested in. The queues for the food were too much, and I noticed this girl with green eyes and hair down past her shoulders. She was in a summer dress. She was with some friends, and they were chattering, oblivious to us, to the world, I suppose, and I just sat and listened to her, watched the sun in her hair. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I could hear her voice, her laughter. I wanted to know her. I became very quiet. Joe said, "What is it, Fred?" And I said, dead seriously, "I want to marry that girl." He laughed at the foolishness. I was dead serious. Miss Roberts joined him in contemplation of foolishness. "No," she said. "Oh, yes," he confessed. "Foolish." "What happened?" she urged him. Well, Joe said, "What are you waiting for? Ask her." That sort of brought me down to earth with a bump. It seemed impossible. You can't go up to a complete stranger and ask her to marry you. "No," laughed Miss Roberts, "you can't." "But I wanted to," he said seriously. "What did you do?" "We eventually went over, like boys do, and asked if they had any sandwiches to spare because we were famished." "And did they?" "Well, they looked at each other a bit, sombre now." Margaret's laughter had stopped, but her eyes were shining. She was just looking at her friend. Then they began giggling. They were just girls, you see. Anyway, we started laughing too. It was all quite silly. In the end, they sort of shrugged acceptance. Margaret's friend said, "Why not?" Hilda, that was. And we sat down with them and got talking. We laughed, talked about, I don't know what. I don't remember. The tennis, I think. We got on. I asked Margaret out that afternoon, during the last match on number 1 court. She said yes, suggested Miss Roberts. He nodded with delighted recollection at the satisfaction her acceptance had brought. "Yes, she did," he said sedately. "What happened to Joe?" "I don't know. We lost touch eventually, over the years. You know how it is. He went to Australia, I believe, married a girl there." His eyes glistened, a far-off look in them. SW19 years ago. And then he snapped away suddenly. "Ah, well, enough of this idle talk. We have a tea firm to run." "Yes, you'll find the day's itinerary laid out in the file before you, Mr. Hedges," she said. "Oh, yes, I'm sure. And that brings me to the great question. Who is going to take over the firm? Who will run Hedges Tea after me?" She nodded sympathetically. "If I'd had a son, it might be a different matter. Margaret and I had 2 daughters, and neither ever showed any interest in the business. Pity." "You have 2 grandsons," she averred. Yes, I do. Both good boys." "Cousins," he said thoughtfully. "Both have been a great addition to the firm." "Yes," she agreed. They both know the firm and have worked here for a long time, he said. Yes. And yet... She waited, her head cocked slightly to one side in gentle query. I wonder, he said. I've overindulged them both, I think. Old age will do that for you. You love them both, naturally, she countered in his defence. They're your grandsons. Of course. I think I've taken upon myself the loss of their grandmother, Margaret. I wasn't really up to filling her place. Margaret was good with them, but when she died, I indulged them both. It was the best I could do. I suppose it hasn't been good for them. She was much better at discipline than me. And they don't get on terribly well either, the two boys. And then, who do you think should take over, Miss Roberts? He asked. Oh, it's hardly a question I should like to answer, she said. Well, I ask it, he persisted. I'm not in a position to say, really, she pleaded. Oh, nonsense. You know everything that goes on here, more than me, probably. You are Hedges Tea, Miss Roberts. But I'd still rather not give an opinion in so personal a family matter, she said. Mr. Hedges looked at her and nodded appreciatively. She had such good judgment. Yes, was all he said. I'll press it no further, then. The news of old Mr. Hedges' retirement, long expected but never quite believed in, yet now impending, caused a stir in the factory that day. Everyone had an opinion on who should take over, and it was quickly apparent to all that it was either James Henry, grandson number 1, or Thomas Filton, grandson number 2, who would take over the firm. Of course, both grandsons were more keenly aware than anyone else of the race for the old chair which existed between them. They had done their best to pump Miss Roberts, or Effie, as they called her, on the matter. Put in a word for me with the old man, winked Tom, as he casually turned his dancing eyes from the long, shapely brunette from finance. James was more forthright. Now listen here, Effie. We don't want that skirt-chaser running Hedges Tea. He'll run this firm into the ground. Miss Hedges waved these aside, pleasantly but impatiently. It really has nothing at all to do with me, she said. Mr. Hedges greeted his grandson James after lunch, and motioned him to a chair. "See that old blunderbuss?" inquired Mr. Hedges, sitting behind his great desk. James glanced up at it, fixed on the wainscot panelling. "Yes," he said. "That was given to your great-great-great-grandfather by Clive of India," he said. "No, really?" inquired James. "So I was told," said Mr. Hedges. "I choose not to challenge such family law." "You mean it isn't true?" "I don't know. I had it from my father and grandfather. I am quite sure neither of them would have deliberately told a lie." "They could be mistaken, though," suggested James. Mr. Hedges waved this aside. "The point is, Jimmy, Hedges Tea is an old family institution, revered, you might say. People have been drinking Hedges Tea from the king down to the humblest workman for, well, yes, centuries now." "Yes," James agreed jovially. What the hell was he on about now? Got to indulge the old boy, though. "Do you know that the old Houses of Parliament was burned to the ground in 1836? "No, I didn't know that," said his grandson politely. It was too soon to take a surreptitious glance at his watch. It would never do to be caught at that. "Yes, well, it was, and they had to rebuild it in the style you see today. This busy Gothic style, very ornate. The Mother of Parliaments, they call it. And Hedges Tea supplied tea for the workers, the builders, the labourers, masons and joiners, all for free. We even supplied tin buckets for them to boil their water over kindling fires." "I didn't know that," said James. "No, well, you see, that was a good marketing ploy, obviously. But it wasn't just that. Hedges tea, your great-great-grandfather saw it as a part of Britain. It gave us great pride to contribute to the rebuilding of Westminster, something so important to the nation. Expensive, I'll bet, mused James. Yes, it was. But it got us the royal warrant. We have it to this day, by appointment to His Majesty. Times change, Grandpa. People aren't so interested in royal warrants these days. I'm not sure how important it is to Hedges, commercially speaking. It's important to me. It's important to Hedges, said the old man quietly. Yes, but I sometimes feel that if we spent less time and money sponsoring charitable causes and what-not, our balance sheet would look a little healthier. Competition is fierce out there. Old Mr. Hedges breathed heavily. He looked at the ceiling and then returned his gaze to his grandson. "How old are you now, Jimmy?" he inquired. 33, returned James, smiling. Another 10 years would do it, he said. Do what? Age you like a fine tea, said his grandfather, and smiled. Later that afternoon, Mr. Hedges met with Tom, grandson number 2, in his office. "I had a chat with your cousin James earlier," said Mr. Hedges. "Yes," said Tom, brushing his floppy hair out of his eyes, a quick smile about his lips. "I wanted to discuss the future with him, and you. Now that I'm retiring, I want to make sure I leave the business in good hands." "Oh, yes," said Tom easily. "Absolutely. We've been a family firm for 250 years now." "It's a long time," agreed Tom. "James thinks we should tighten our belts, even if it means losing the royal warrant." "James has always been about money," opined Tom dismissively. "Yes, perhaps that is so. It's no bad thing, but I need to strike a balance." "Oh, I'm all for the royal thingamabob," said Tom. His grandfather surveyed him shrewdly. "Yes," he said. "Yes, I'll bet you are. It's important to Hedges. It's important to the staff, to all of us." "Oh, yes," agreed Tom easily. "No doubts about that." "Reputation still means a lot," said Mr. Hedges. "It does," affirmed Tom. "Not only the reputation of one's goods, but of one's integrity, and personal reputation too. These things are important, Tom." Tom nodded without quarrel. His grandfather studied him. He could see he would gain no traction with young Tom. He was the line of least resistance always. The interviews with the sole surviving members of the Hedges clan did nothing to settle Mr. Hedges' mind. In fact, they confirmed in him all his fears. "I wish I could stay on another 10 or 15 years, he told Miss Roberts later that afternoon as she was tidying his desk. "It would give them both an opportunity to mature." She nodded. "Perhaps they will grow into the job," she suggested. "You were only 24 when you took over." "It's true," he said. "I wasn't ready for the business, but they were different times. I felt a keen responsibility to prove myself, and mostly to ensure that Hedges continued to thrive. It took a long time. There were difficult years, but I always knew the most important thing was to ensure the old family firm survived. It was entrusted to me. The man who told me to sit still in the ox-blood chair is still there, you know. So is my grandfather, and those who have passed before him, those who knew Clive in India." He paused. "I do not detect in either of the boys a sense of what is required, of that tradition." "It will come," said Miss Roberts soothingly. "They're both young still." "Yes, they are. But Tom is, 31 now. He spends far too much time with girls from the office, far too much time for a young married man. I've turned a blind eye to it, too much of a blind eye perhaps. I justified it to myself when he was in his 20s, as a young man sowing his wild oats. But 31-year-old men should have sown them by now, especially when they're married. Time he started a family. He shook his head. I worry for the future of the firm. What about James? Asked Miss Roberts. Money. Nothing but money. Fine clothes and expensive cars for him and his wife. Has to have the best of everything, and his wife is worse. I fear if she had anything to say in the matter, they'd sell the firm and squander the fortune on themselves. Miss Roberts could only look sympathetic at Mr. Hedges. The two cousins spent more time than usual vying for inside information with Miss Roberts. Effie, neither of them, she noted, had anything good to say about their rival. "No news, eh, Effie?" said James, inspiring a confidence. "Well, I have some. Do you know about that girl from finance and Tom?" "I don't," she said firmly, "and I am blessed by my ignorance." "Well," said James, ignoring this, and continuing in a low voice, "I think Grandad ought to know." She looked at him admonishingly and said nothing. And Tom was every bit as indiscreet. "Hi there, Effie. What's new?" he inquired, strolling into the office while Mr. Hedges was out, and proceeded to leaf through his out tray. "They're Mr. Hedges' confidential papers," she protested. "I know," he said calmly. "Well, you really oughtn't to be going through them then," she said. He turned now, smiling. "Just keeping myself up to speed, Effie," he said. He watched her for a few moments, pursed his lips before speaking. "Listen," he said, "Grandad thinks a lot of you, you know. He really does. Trusts your judgment and all that sort of stuff. He listens to you. Probably if you gave him advice on who should take over the company, he'd appreciate it. You know, there could be a nice little raise in it for you. You'd like that, wouldn't you?" He coaxed her, slightly obsequiously. She merely smiled. "I shouldn't dream of giving him my opinion," she said, "even if he asked for it." He laughed and drew back. "Just a thought," he said. "Keep it in mind." She was patient. She liked both grandsons, in spite of themselves, really. She had known them a long time. They were rather young and undisciplined. Would they take care of the firm? Of course, she would like a nice little raise. Yes, she would. She was paid well enough, but we can all imagine being paid better. The boys were more alike than they knew, decided Miss Roberts, because they both had the same approach. "Effie, has Grandad made up his mind yet?" inquired James. "You know, we don't want that slime-ball Tom to get the job. Think of it." "I can't say anything," she pleaded. "The decision is with your grandfather." "Yes, but you know his thoughts, don't you?" "It is Mr. Hedges' decision," she said firmly, and moved on. Tom was never far away either, ready to accost her without notice. He ambushed her in the corridor after lunch one day. He didn't like to be put off by her either. He had a certain persistence with women. "Effie," he said, a hint of menace, "think about it. Do you imagine that skinflint James would give you the sort of raise I would?" She considered. He had his eyes fixed on her. Well, mostly. They strayed momentarily as a blonde girl from the shop floor passed by. He decided to press his advantage. "Do you remember when he restricted your inflation rise because he said the firm couldn't afford it? The year before last, wasn't it?" "Yes," she said, remembering that fallow year. But the firm had gone through a rough patch after the new washing machinery acquisitions. He conceded, sceptically. "But it didn't stop him getting a whacking great pay rise, did it?" She paused. "No," she said, "it didn't." And then, as another thought occurred to her, "Nor you," she reminded him. He held out his hands in helpless supplication. "None of that was down to me," he advised. "It was all Skinflint James." As the day of the decision came closer, The two cousins laid siege to Effie's office. As soon as their grandfather left for one reason or another, one or the other would appear in the doorway. "He's a womanizer, you know," said James urgently. "It's a wonder the firm isn't being taken to court or something. You know that, don't you, Effie?" She smiled. "He has always had an eye for the ladies, but I thought he had calmed down since his marriage." An expostulation of derision came from James. "Not a bit of it. His poor wife. You know that new girl in accounts?" Miss Roberts looked scandalized. "Yes." "Well, rumour has it—" "I don't listen to rumours," she broke in tersely. "Well, perhaps you should," he said significantly. "You can't bury your head in the sand, Effie. Can you imagine what he would do to the reputation of this firm? Probably lose us the royal warrant," he added with judicious cunning. Miss Roberts eyed him steadily, but had no words. "I have no idea who should take over," said old Mr. Hedges, a little forlornly. Miss Roberts was attentive. She shook her head, but was likewise stumped for a solution. "What do you think of Tom?" he asked for the umpteenth time. "He's a bright and charming man, good with the customers," she said. "He knows how to oil the wheels of customer relations." "Yes," said old Mr. Hedges, "he does." He thought on this. "But is he reliable?" She considered. "I wouldn't say he isn't," she said. "What about James, then?" "He's got a good business head," she confirmed. "How do you rate him with people, though?" "He's good when he sets his mind to it. Sometimes needs the proper motivation and oversight." "Yes, I agree," he said thoughtfully. The retirement of old Mr. Hedges was only a couple of weeks away. It came all too soon for many of the older employees. Miss Roberts was not exactly old, but she numbered herself among those who valued the old ways. "I should like to take you to dinner, Miss Roberts, if I may," said old Mr. Hedges, as he prepared to leave the office early one afternoon that week. "Oh," she said, "really by way of thanking you in some small way for all the service you have given this firm over the years, and myself, of course. I rather think your retirement from the firm, when it comes, will be of greater impact than my own, really." "Oh, you know that isn't true, Mr. Hedges," she said, "but thank you." "Well, I can't thank you enough, and I shall certainly miss my cup of coffee in the morning. No one makes it like Miss Roberts." They were old colleagues. An unspoken cordiality and affection was there beneath the formality of their relationship of many years' duration. It would not be said, of course, but in truth they would miss each other, and parting was simply bringing it to their attention that it was so. They went to dinner a couple of nights later, recalled old times, difficulties they had shared, the leaner years, the occasional personal tragedies that intrude upon life, and they spoke at length of the succession to the leather chair behind the old great desk. The word was on the factory floor that the decision had been made. It went about the plant like a ripple, quick with speculation. Accounts had it first, then HR. Soon it was running through packaging, then processing beside the car park had it. The new boss. First James arrived at the office a little after 10, followed by Tom just minutes later. They were seen in the reception area, and barely acknowledged each other. Which of them had it? Who looked happiest? It was impossible to tell. They both went up to the office together to hear the result. "Wish me luck, Effie," said Tom as he went in through the outer office. His cousin, James, winked knowingly. Miss Roberts sighed and went about her business. They were in the office only a short time, the boys, and then the door opened abruptly as they filed out. They wore long faces, were clearly disappointed. "Well," said James to Tom, out in the corridor, "after all I've put into this firm, I'm half-minded to quit." "Me too," agreed Tom. "It's a bloody cheek." "Yes, it is." The two had seldom been seen in such agreement on any matter. They went to the pub for a drink to discuss the matter or drown their sorrows, and then they returned to the office where they were to meet the new boss. Neither was happy about it. Word was out in the factory now. The whole place was agog. They walked in through the outer office and into the inner office, sat in the seats before the great desk. They adopted a surly, defiant look, fortified by their lunchtime in the pub. "Now, I've called you in just for a brief chat to set the tone," said Miss Roberts. "I thought it would be useful if we could discuss the new arrangements and establish a few procedures." The two men looked at her in barely concealed resentment. James had his arms folded. "You can do what you like, Effie," he said. "Doubt I shall be here long enough to see many of them." She nodded slowly. "I see," she said. "It will be a pity to see you leave the firm, James." "Same goes," laughed Tom. "No hard feelings, Effie, but we think of this as a family business. It's unlikely it will work." He nearly said, "with an outsider running things." It hung in the air between them. "I see," said Effie. "Well, I can certainly understand your feelings. From my point of view, I will be taking things forward very much in accordance with your grandfather's wishes. I fully intend to consult him in all matters pertaining to the firm in the future, drawing on his wealth of experience, and I shall certainly value your input and support in this process for however long it lasts." This was met by a derisive snort from Tom, and a look of feigned, profound boredom by James, who was examining the ceiling. They looked like belligerent schoolboys before a headmistress. "Is that all, Effie?" inquired Tom, with icy, impatient politeness, glancing at his watch. "I have a meeting with finance at 3. "Yes," said Miss Roberts, "that will be all for now. Oh, and I would like you to ensure that your finance meetings in future take place with Mr. Pirbright. I've appraised him of this already, and he concurs. It's for the best," she added firmly. "What?" Tom said, startled. "The girls," said Miss Roberts confidentially. "You know how people will talk." He stared open-mouthed at her. "Effie," he began, looking querulous, rebellious, as if about to argue, but no words came. He slumped back angrily. James curled his lip sardonically, glanced at his cousin. He had a grim satisfaction which somehow could not fully satisfy him today. "And James," she said, "I want you in at 8:30 a.m. tomorrow, and in future, unless we've agreed some other arrangement, I want to make sure we are all putting in the hours, and all staff know the importance of punctuality. I hope that is clear." James mumbled something. He was slumped in his chair, recalcitrant. His hands were in his pocket, sullen. "Whatever you say, Effie. I think I need to have a word with Grandad." "Yes, by all means," she said pleasantly. "You should." "Yes," rejoined Tom, rousing to the challenge. "Yes, I think we need to have a word with Grandad about this. Seems he's losing his marbles." Effie looked at him patiently, looked from one cousin to the other. James now leaned forward in his chair, recovering somewhat at his cousin's support. "We're going to see about all this, Effie," he said, something of a warning there, a slight smirk. "We'll go over this evening and have a word with Grandad. Oh, yes." "Well, if you do, can you make sure you come round sometime before 8, suggested Miss Roberts pleasantly. "But not later. Freddie and I will be watching our programme then." The two men stopped. Their faces fell. They stared at her. They looked at each other quickly and then back to Effie. "Do you mean to say," ventured Tom hoarsely. She was smiling silent acquiescence. "Good God," he concluded. "Well, that just takes the biscuit," said James. The two men got up slowly, gave her a foul look in parting, and walked grim-faced, resentful, towards the door. As James placed his hand on the doorknob, she said, "Oh, and one more thing." They stopped and turned to face her. She was no longer smiling, but there remained a glint in her eye. "I'd like it if in future, please call me Miss Roberts."